When I got the envelope from the HOA, I thought it was another flyer for their annual barbecue. Turns out, it was a fine $500 for unauthorized livestock. Livestock? For my chickens. I stood in my garage, holding the letter, staring at the ridiculous wording. Chickens. Not a cow, not a pig, just 6 quiet hens I kept in the backyard coop. They were cleaner than most people's dogs and laid fresh eggs every morning. I wasn't running a farm. I was just a guy who liked omelets and didn't trust grocery store yolks. My name's Isaac Whitlow. I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. Built my coop during the pandemic when eggs were harder to find than toilet paper. The HOA didn't say a word back then. If anything, people loved the fresh eggs I handed out, including the woman who signed the fine, Nancy Penbrook. Nancy's the HOA president. Mid-50s, perma-scowl, and a voice like a smoke alarm with a law degree. She has this way of popping up whenever someone mows their lawn an inch too short or leaves a trash bin out 6 minutes past garbage pickup. She's the kind of woman who carries a clipboard to a block party. And here's the hilarious part. Every summer, the HOA throws a big community barbecue. They serve burgers, hot dogs, potato salad, and get this, deviled eggs. Everyone loves those deviled eggs. Guess who's been supplying the eggs for free the last 3 years? Yeah, me. I never made a big deal about it. I just liked helping out. I dropped off a few dozen every month at the HOA clubhouse fridge. No one asked questions, no one complained until now. So I called the number listed on the fine. It went straight to Nancy's voicemail. Typical. That evening, I showed up at the HOA meeting. I didn't go often, but this time I sat front row, fine in hand. Nancy was at the head of the table in her usual salmon-colored blouse and matching lipstick, already mid-rant about someone's unauthorized garden gnome. When she saw me raise my hand, her eyes narrowed like I just parked on her lawn. Yes, Mr. Whitlow, she said, drawing out my name like it offended her mouth. I'd like to discuss this fine, I said, holding it up. For my chickens. That's not up for discussion. Livestock isn't permitted under Section 9, Subarticle B of the Community Code. Didn't stop you from eating their eggs, I said. The room went quiet. Nancy blinked. Excuse me. I've been donating eggs to the HOA barbecue for 3 years. Those deviled eggs everyone loves? Those are from my hens. There were murmurs. A few neighbors looked at each other. Someone near the back whispered, "Wait, really?" Nancy's eyes twitched. That's irrelevant. You broke the code. No, I didn't, I said. I looked it up. Section 9, Subarticle B defines livestock as animals kept for labor or meat production. These are laying hens. No meat. No labor. Just eggs. I even have a permit from the city. Backyard hens are legal here, HOA or not. More murmurs. One of the board members, a guy named Ron who always wore Hawaiian shirts, leaned over and whispered something to Nancy. She waved him off like a fly. Regardless, she said, folding her arms, the board has voted. The fine stands. Then I'll take it to the city, I said. And while I'm at it, I'll let the health department know you've been serving unregulated food at your BBQs. No documentation, no source labeling, and definitely no food handling permits. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stood. Also, you might want to check your fridge. I left a note with the last egg delivery. Said it was my final donation. And just like that, the HOA barbecue lost its secret ingredient. I didn't hear from the HOA for 4 days after that meeting. Not a word. Not a letter. Not even one of those passive-aggressive notices they tape to your door when you forget to edge your driveway. The silence was suspicious. On the 5th day, I came home from work and found a neon orange sticker slapped across my front window. Immediate action required animal sanitation violation. Bold letters, all caps. Real subtle. I didn't even get inside before my neighbor, Carl, wandered over from across the street. He still had dirt on his hands from the raised beds he was building with his grandkids. You see this garbage? He asked, pointing at the sticker. They left one on your coop too. I walked around the house. Sure enough, the same sticker was plastered on the chicken coop door, partially covering the latch. Carl shook his head. They're saying one of your hens got out. Claimed it was scratching around in the Penbrook's hydrangeas. That's impossible, I said. I reinforced the wire mesh last spring. There's no way they're getting out unless someone opens that coop themselves. He lowered his voice. Don't shoot the messenger, but I saw Nancy and her husband lurking around your yard 2 nights ago. They had flashlights. I stared at him. You serious? Didn't think much of it at the time. Figured maybe they dropped something at the barbecue and were looking for it. But now, he trailed off. The next morning, I checked the coop logs. I keep a cheap trail cam mounted near the back gate mainly because raccoons used to get too curious. I pulled the SD card, plugged it into my laptop, and queued up the footage from 2 nights ago. There they were, Nancy and her husband, Mitchell, around 11:30 at night. They climbed over the fence, walked straight to the coop, and opened the side hatch. One of the hens flapped out, clearly startled. Mitchell tried to shoo it into the Penbrook's yard. I sat back in my chair, stunned. That was trespassing, animal endangerment, and a deliberate setup. 10 minutes later, I was at the precinct filing a report. The officer on duty, a tall guy named Ramirez, watched the footage with a frown. "Let me get this straight," he said, pausing the video as Mitchell stepped into frame holding what looked like a rake. "They broke onto your property, released your animal, and then reported you for a sanitation violation?" "Yep." He leaned forward. "You got that coop registered with the city? Since you're 4. Got the inspection forms too." Ramirez nodded. "All right. This is bad. You mind if we get a copy of this footage?" I handed him the SD card. "Take it. There's more where that came from." By that afternoon, a formal report had been filed. I didn't stop there. I emailed a copy of the footage to the city's Animal Control Division, then sent a separate complaint to the zoning board with documentation of my permit and coop layout. The next HOA meeting was a week away. I didn't wait. 2 days later, I hosted a neighborhood potluck. Called it Eggs and Evidence. My backyard was packed. I set up a projector screen. Carl brought over folding chairs. My friend Sarah, who works as a paralegal, handed out copies of the HOA's own bylaws highlighting everything Nancy had violated. I played the footage. Gasps. Shouts. Someone in the back yelled, "Is that Mitchell with a rake?" Then I pulled out the HOA's annual barbecue menu. I kept a copy from last year. It listed farm fresh deviled eggs as a feature item. I showed the time-stamped emails confirming I had provided the eggs, no pay, no acknowledgement, no food safety paperwork. Sarah stepped up. "That's a health code violation. They served unregulated food to over 80 people without disclosure, and they knowingly accepted it from a private residence. If anyone had gotten sick." People started whispering. Then someone stood up. It was Darlene, a retired nurse who always wore visors and knew everyone's birthdays. "I had food poisoning after last year's barbecue," she said. "Thought it was the mayo." "You're telling me it might have been those eggs?" Sarah folded her arms. "Can't say for sure. But the HOA never asked for a food handler's permit or did any quality checks. That alone is a liability issue." Carl raised his hand. "How much money does the HOA collect for that barbecue anyway?" "Just under $8,000, I said. "From ticket sales, vendor booths, and a city grant." And that's when the real bombshell dropped. Sarah flipped open her binder. "That grant requires the event to be managed by a registered nonprofit. The HOA isn't one. They never filed the proper paperwork." I checked with the city clerk. "That's fraud." Chairs scraped back. Voices rose. Someone dropped their plate. By Monday, the city had launched an audit into the HOA's finances. Nancy tried to get ahead of it by sending out an emergency bulletin claiming miscommunication and misunderstanding, but she didn't count on my next move. I filed a restraining order against both her and Mitchell for unlawful entry and animal tampering. The judge approved a temporary order within 48 hours. They couldn't come within 50 feet of my property. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, it wasn't in the clubhouse. That had been temporarily closed while the city investigated misused grant funds. Instead, we met at the public library. The room was tense. Ron, the Hawaiian shirt board member, opened the meeting with a red face and no clipboard in sight. "We're here to address some recent developments. First, due to legal concerns, Nancy Penbrook has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Second, we're reviewing all violations issued in the past 60 days. And third," he stopped as the door opened. 2 officers walked in. One of them was Ramirez. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "We're here for Mitchell Penbrook. There's a warrant for illegal trespassing and attempted falsification of municipal complaints." Mitchell, sitting 2 rows from the front, turned sheet white. He stood slowly, said nothing, and followed them out without a word. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the silence was louder than either. Ron cleared his throat. "Right then. Moving on. We'll be forming a temporary ethics committee. Mr. Whitlow, Would you consider chairing it? I looked around. Carl nodded once. Sarah gave a thumbs up. Darlene leaned forward, eyes shining. I stood. Sure, but we're rewriting the bylaws. From scratch. And chickens aren't going anywhere. The applause was quiet at first, but it grew. No one looked at Nancy's empty seat. No one had to. The hens were safe. The barbecue was canceled. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like ours again. 2 weeks after the library meeting, I found myself sitting across from an assistant district attorney in a windowless office downtown. Her name was Marlene Trask, and she had the kind of presence that made you sit straighter without realizing it. The city had fast-tracked the investigation after Sarah's documentation exposed the misuse of funds, and now things were moving at a pace the HOA wasn't prepared for. Let's walk through this, she said, tapping her pen against a yellow legal pad. You've got documented evidence of the Penbrooks trespassing, opening your coop, and attempting to direct one of your animals onto their property? I nodded. Trail cam footage. Time-stamped. They weren't subtle. And you supplied eggs to multiple HOA events without compensation or a formal agreement? Correct. Including the city's subsidized barbecue. They listed my eggs on the menu. I've got the flyers. She scribbled something, then looked up. What about HOA accounting records? Can we prove the grant money was spent improperly? I passed her a flash drive. Ron gave me access to their financials after the last meeting. He didn't want to be involved anymore. I found payments that don't match up, catering invoices with no vendor names, food supply costs that don't align with receipts, and a few payments marked event planning that went straight to Nancy's personal account. Marlene raised an eyebrow. You're telling me the HOA president pocketed city money under a fake line item? That's what it looks like. She clicked her pen closed. All right, that changes things. I left the building with a signed affidavit and a court date. The city was preparing charges against Nancy for fraud, misappropriation of public funds, and falsification of event documentation. Mitchell was already facing trespassing charges, and now the scope of the investigation had widened. Back in the neighborhood, things were shifting. For the first time in years, the HOA board was holding open forums, no agendas, no closed sessions, just folding chairs on the lawn outside the temporarily shuttered clubhouse. Residents were showing up in record numbers. People who had never once spoken into a microphone were now standing up and recounting years of ignored concerns, retaliatory fines, and threats of foreclosure over trivial violations. At one meeting, a woman named Elena, who lived 2 blocks over, stood with a folder of her own. Her voice trembled at first, but it gained strength quickly. She threatened to put a lien on my house because my mailbox wasn't regulation height, she said. I found out later there is no set height in the bylaws. She made it up. Another man, James, stepped forward next. Nancy fined my son's lemonade stand for operating a business without a permit. He was 7. Every story added weight to the growing case. Ron had stepped in as interim president, but he was clearly overwhelmed. I offered to help organize the ethics committee and start the bylaw rewrite. Sarah joined in to assist with legal language, and soon we had a team of 8 combing through the outdated documents, line by line. One night, as we gathered around Carl's patio table with laptops and printouts, Darlene arrived with a city council liaison named Malcolm. He wore a sharp navy suit and carried a leather folder with the city seal embossed on the front. He shook my hand with a firm grip. Just wanted to see the team that's been making waves, he said. You've got half the council talking, Mr. Whitlow. We're just trying to fix what got broken, I told him. He glanced over the bylaws we were editing. You're doing more than that. The mayor's office is considering a pilot program for HOA oversight. If this works, your neighborhood could become a model for accountability. That caught everyone's attention. Carl leaned forward. You mean like external audits? Annual reviews? Exactly. Independent election monitors, mandatory financial disclosures, and a grievance process that doesn't involve threatening letters and fake violations. Sarah whistled softly. That would change everything. Malcolm nodded. But you've got to finish what you started. Get through the reforms before the next fiscal quarter. Prove it can work. We agreed on the spot. The ethics committee doubled its meetings. We divided tasks, verified every citation in the bylaws, and rewrote entire sections to reflect actual city ordinances instead of whatever power fantasy Nancy had been operating under. Meanwhile, the legal case moved forward. Nancy's attorney tried to stall, claiming health issues and procedural delays, but the DA's office wasn't having it. The evidence was too strong. When the judge refused to dismiss the charges, Nancy finally cracked. She agreed to a plea deal to avoid jail time, 5 years probation, restitution to the city, and a lifetime ban from holding any office in a homeowners association. Mitchell wasn't so lucky. The judge hit him with a misdemeanor conviction and a hefty fine for criminal trespassing and animal endangerment. The neighborhood didn't throw a party. No balloons, no banners. Just a quiet sense of relief that the storm had passed. A month later, I walked past the old HOA bulletin board. Someone had taken down the faded notices and replaced them with a laminated sheet titled Community Charter 2.0. At the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "NO fines without due process, NO retaliation for reporting, NO farm animal policy, without city alignment transparency, is mandatory." It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was honest. And it was ours. At the next neighborhood gathering, no longer called a barbecue, just a community meal, I brought 24 deviled eggs. No one asked where they came from. They didn't have to. As I set the tray down, Elena walked over and nudged me with her elbow. "Guess you're the egg guy again," she said, smiling. I laughed. "This time, they're certified." Sarah passed by and added, "And this time, nobody's stealing your chickens." Carl raised a glass from across the lawn. "To Isaac. And to the best omelets in town." People clinked glasses, shared plates, and for the first time in a long while, nobody watched their backs. There were no fines, no notes on doors, no one counting inches of grass or measuring mailbox posts. Just neighbors. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned that deep purple that only comes after a long, hot day, I stood near the coop and listened to the hens rustling contentedly in their run. They didn't know they'd started a revolution, but I did. 3 months had passed since the ethics committee finalized the new bylaws and the city wrapped up its audit. The neighborhood had been through a storm, and though things had quieted, the ground was still shifting beneath the surface. I noticed it in small ways: residents stopping to chat instead of rushing indoors, kids drawing chalk murals on the sidewalks without being told to scrub them off, and no more anonymous letters about untrimmed hedges or faded shutters. But then came the certified envelope from the county recorder's office. I opened it at the kitchen table with my boots still on and a mug of lukewarm coffee in hand. Inside was a notice of lien filed against my property by the HOA, dated 2 weeks prior. The claim? Unpaid fines related to unauthorized animal housing and overdue assessments. I stared at the document. The fines had been dismissed. The bylaws had been rewritten. Nancy was gone. How was this even possible? I called Sarah. "They can't do that," she said. "The board voted to nullify all penalties issued under the old regime. If someone filed this, they either forged the authorization or accessed the HOA's legal credentials without permission. Could it be leftover from before?" I asked. "No," she said. "The date's too recent." Someone did this deliberately. Carl showed up a few minutes later when I texted him. He brought over his tablet and pulled up the public filings website. The lien was real. It listed the HOA's digital signature with a notarized stamp dated 3 days after Mitchell's sentencing. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later with a folder and a tight expression. She laid out a copy of the board's vote transcript from the last public meeting. It explicitly states no further action is to be taken regarding past animal-related fines. Any attempt to pursue them would be, quote, "a violation of the board's current standing orders." Carl looked between us. "So someone's pretending to act on behalf of the HOA? Like identity theft?" Sarah nodded. "That's one possibility. The other is worse. Someone still on the board is doing this behind closed doors." We brought it to Ron that evening. He'd stepped down as interim president shortly after the reforms were ratified, handing the reins over to a newer, younger board. The new president, a contractor named Lila, had been pushing transparency hard. She was a single mom, fair but firm, and more interested in community gardens than power trips. Ron met us at his porch with a laptop already open. "I've got something you'll want to see," he said. He turned the screen toward us. It showed a login history from the HOA's document portal. An administrative account had been accessed from an IP address outside the state. Several documents were modified in a single session: the fine ledger, the lien request form, and a backdated board meeting summary that didn't match the actual minutes. "Who has access to that account?" I asked. Ron hesitated. "Only 4 people. Myself, Lila, the HOA's treasurer, and Nancy." She's banned from holding office, Sarah said sharply. She is, Ron replied. But she still had the password. We never changed it after she left. That night, we filed a formal complaint with the county registrar. The document had been notarized by a mobile notary operating out of a strip mall 20 miles away. A quick check through the public notary database revealed something worse. The stamp was forged. The notary listed on the form hadn't operated in over a year. Sarah didn't even sit down when we got to the police station. She walked straight to the front desk, handed over the evidence, and requested to speak with a detective in financial crimes. Within the hour, we were in a back room with Detective Soria, a no-nonsense woman with a buzz cut and a silver badge that caught the fluorescent light like a blade. You're saying a former HOA president, already under legal sanction, used unauthorized credentials to forge a notarized lien against your property? She asked, looking at me. She also falsified board meeting records to justify the fine, I added. Soria tapped her pen against her notepad. That's fraud, forgery, and impersonation of a legal authority. If we can link her directly to the login and the forged documents, we've got enough to press formal charges. Ron emailed over the login logs. Carl provided a copy of the fake notary stamp. I gave them the lien notice and the certified envelope it came in. Within 48 hours, the case was open. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Lila, the new HOA president, found a deleted email thread in the association's archive. Nancy had contacted the HOA's former treasurer, an old friend of hers named Marcus, asking him to correct the mistake regarding Mr. Whitlow's unresolved fine history. The email had been deleted, but not before a daily backup captured it. Detective Soria moved fast. Nancy was arrested at her sister's home in the next county over. The search warrant turned up a laptop with the HOA login still saved in the password manager and a USB drive labeled Board Archives. Inside were copies of altered documents, including several with her name misspelled to avoid detection. She was charged with 3 counts of fraud, 1 count of filing false public documents, and a violation of her probation terms from the prior plea deal. This time, the judge didn't offer probation. Nancy was sentenced to 18 months in county jail. Marcus, the treasurer, confessed under pressure. He admitted to processing the forged document at Nancy's request in exchange for a promised consulting fee once she regained control of the board. He agreed to a plea deal and surrendered his credentials. With the case closed, the county nullified the lien. The registrar issued a formal apology, and Lila passed a new HOA resolution requiring a quarterly password reset and dual authorization for all public filings. Sarah helped write the language to ensure it couldn't be bypassed. The neighborhood held a small gathering at the park, not a celebration, exactly, but a quiet acknowledgement of what had happened. Folding chairs formed a loose circle under the oaks. People brought thermoses and picnic blankets. Lila spoke first. We can't undo what happened, she said, but we can make sure it never happens again. No one argued. I brought a tray of egg salad sandwiches. Just sandwiches. No deviled eggs this time. I figured the hens deserved a break. As the sun dipped past the rooftops, Carl leaned over and said, You ever think about running for the board? Not a chance, I said. I've got enough on my plate. You'd win in a landslide. I shook my head. I'll stick to chickens and bylaws. Sarah caught the tail end of that and grinned. Well, maybe you can help us draft that new amendment about poultry housing. We're thinking of offering a subsidy for residents who want backyard coops. I raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Only for people who pass an inspection and prove they aren't charging for eggs. The city's backing it as part of their food sustainability program. I laughed. All right, you've got my attention. Later that night, I walked back to the coop. The hens were tucked in, feathers fluffed, beaks buried beneath their wings. I latched the gate, checked the feeder, and stood for a moment under the stars. Things had changed. The HOA had tried to use its power to control, to punish, to retaliate. But in the end, they'd been outmaneuvered by the very rules they once twisted. Not with shouting or threats, but with documentation, patience, and the kind of quiet resilience they never saw coming. I turned off the coop light and headed inside. The neighborhood had found its balance again. Not perfect, not peaceful every day, but fair. And that was enough.